Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another super cool radio interview. I'm your host, Matthew Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning in. I have an incredible guest joining me at this time who I'm very excited to have on the podcast. He's an absolute punk legend. He's the frontman for the Dwarves. Please welcome Blag the Ripper.
Right on. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. As I said, I'm excited to chat with you about obviously all things the Dwarves, your career, writing, everything you got. I'm excited to have you on the podcast.
I'm just sorry I didn't have time to shave, you know. I'm Italian, so this is like 3 hours growth here.
Well, I'm Polish, so this is like 4 days. All right, so I mean, before we really start, obviously, Dwarves got some very exciting things in the works, obviously with the record store release and the upcoming tour. But I'm curious because I said in my intro, punk legend. Did you ever see yourself, like when you first started your music career, becoming a punk icon?
You know, that's a great question because I think part of how we became that was by repeating over and over that we were legends. You know, like it started out as a joke, and we were pretty young, and the band would just, everywhere we'd go, we'd get banned or we'd get in a fight or things would get trashed and shit would happen. And so there was kind of legend stuff around it because everybody would be talking and you'd hear these crazy rumors and stuff that never happened and stuff that got ascribed to us. And so we started laughing, and then, you know, we kind of turned it into, you know, rock legends. You know, we would sort of joke about it. And then the more we repeated it, the more I would see it in the write-ups about us. And so it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, you know? I mean, we really are punk legends. I mean, because what's a legend, you know? It's something that might be true or it might not be true. It's something that everyone seems to know about, but nobody really knows the details. And, you know, so it was like, oh, yeah, we are legends.
Well, kind of going along with that, what's like the most crazy story you've heard about yourself that's not actually true?
Well, some of them are true, but they're all like, if Vaj Moore, who was our original drummer and a really crazy guy, would do some crazy thing in a town, you know, sleep with some horribly unattractive woman, or, you know, drink 8 bottles of Jack Daniels and fall off a roof or whatever, it would always be ascribed to me because I was like kind of the person people knew from the Dwarves. And so I would hear all these stories about me and the things that I had done, you know, when I was home, like smoking a joint and eating some ice cream or something. You know, the actual story would be, you know, these incredible things that I had supposedly done. So there's a lot of that. But yeah, you know, I mean, sometimes it works for you, sometimes it works against you. You know what I mean? I think we deserve to be legends because I think that we made a lot of great records that are really interesting and listenable, you know, in our later years, and a lot of records that were really interesting and sort of unlistenable in our early years. And we made a lot of cool records. We always changed. We did a lot of live shows that kind of freaked people out. And so, yeah, from there, you just get all these stories. I mean, I couldn't even start to, you know, the ones that aren't true, the ones that are true, the ones that have, most legends have sort of a grain of truth to them, you know, something that actually happened, you know, somebody got punched and it turns into he got murdered, you know, somebody snorted a line of coke and it turned into, you know, he shot a bunch of heroin, you know, whatever it was, you know, it was like, you know, and then the stories of the band, because there really did used to be a lot of fights at our shows. And sometimes it came from stuff that we could sort of be responsible for and had started, but usually it was just assholes in the crowd freaking out and starting fights, and you know, or people who were angry from a previous show, or somebody, you know, somebody from the band had slept with their girlfriend, and so the next time they were really angry, you know, whatever it was, you know.
Oh no, for sure. But I do like how you said like legends there's like some shred of truth somewhere in a legend, you know, somewhere that just like sparks a whole, you know, story or legend with it. But no, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus probably did some interesting things too, you know, but just they can't prove anything, you know. He might have, there might have been a big dinner party, and somehow he made a couple extra loaves of bread happen, and then from there, it becomes this incredible thing. So yeah, I mean, that's part of what rock and roll is about, is people like me that you don't really know who they are and you haven't really heard their shit, and yet there's kind of something about it.
Oh no, for sure. Like if anyone Google's the Dwarves, like a bunch of stuff comes up, for you, and just obviously the stories being told, and just the music itself, which is kind of how I obviously learned about you guys. I don't know if you remember, you guys played like the TV show Monster Garage.
Yeah,
this was probably
right.
like 20.
That was notorious. That was very funny with the nudity on Monster Garage, and they had to keep putting a shield over it and whatever it was, and then we went in there and played for those guys. That was pretty hilarious.
So I'm kind of curious, because obviously that's how I discovered you guys, but what was kind of the setup going into that? Obviously it's a garage, so did you have to bring your own equipment, or did they provide it? Like, what was that?
I can't remember.
Okay.
It was a TV show, and we're not real famous for bringing our equipment everywhere. We usually just use whatever's sitting around. So they might have had a couple amps for us and a drum set, or it might have been that we actually went there early in the day and set all our stuff up. I mean, I think they did that in Orange County, and a lot of the band lives in LA. I'm in San Francisco, but I think even then a lot of the band lived in LA, and so we might have had gear there. It's hard for me to remember things like that. But what I do remember is that we definitely got some stares for the weird Hugh cannot be named guy with the outfit, and that was funny. And and then I think when we played, it's always the thing I'm very proud of with this band is that I think any rock and roll fan can like us when we play, even people who really, their ears aren't really tuned to like hardcore or punk or whatever. I mean, we're a rock and roll band. It's just what we've always been. And whether we're playing thrash really fast or a pretty straightforward punk song, or whether we do something more garagey or whatever, we tend to win people over. I'm always getting after a show where people go, I never heard you guys. You guys are really good, or oh man, I didn't think I was going to like this, but I like this, and it was like, if only there would have been some marketing along the way, or some people that believed in it. I think it could have been a lot bigger, but it was more, again, the legend stuff can work for you or against you. And a lot of times in the industry, it sort of worked against us. But TV always kind of liked us because the few times we could get on there was something visual. I mean, we did Playboy After Dark, and we did a few things, and it was like, people were like, whoa, what was that? Which is, again, something I always loved about cool rock bands, is that they kind of surprised you, and you were like, whoa, what was that? So, yeah.
Oh no, for sure. I like kind of how you said, like, the different kind of music styles you guys have. Like, there's usually something there for everyone who listens to you guys. Maybe if they don't like the punk, they like the more thrash, or the other kind of elements you guys throw in. But I like you guys kind of a little bit of versatility with your music.
Yeah, I think especially as the years went on. I mean, we started as a real kind of 60s garage band with like Oregon, and everybody had paisley ties and Beatle boots. We were really into 60s stuff and 50s stuff. But then as we started playing live, a lot of those retro bands were always just that. It was like, well, there's your outfit and there's your old guitar, but your band ain't shit. And, when we started, the most exciting shows out there were punk rock shows. And I went to them, even when I wasn't that big on hardcore, but I saw Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys and the Misfits and Minor Threat. I mean, I just saw band after band because that was where the fun was. And the more retro people were like, do you have the original Black Label release of this 7-inch on blah, blah, and blah, blah records and all this shit? And I'd just be like, I play in a rock band. I like the song, I'm not like collecting all this shit. I don't care about that, So it was like, and we would always get in shit at shows and get in fights and stuff. And one day we just turned around and looked at each other and we're like, we're not really a 60s band, we're like a punk band, that's kind of what we are. And so it evolved very quickly to like the Blood Guts phase. I mean, again, that was a very straightforward form of kind of misfits, hardcore rock and roll punk. And then, you know, as the years went on more and more, and I met different people and I played with different people, and, you know, you'd get shit like, you know, turns out Josh Freese is a fan. Well, shit, I can get the best session drummer going on my record. Wow, isn't that interesting? What can we do with that? You know, and Nick Oliveri came in. You know, we had taken Caius on a very early tour, and then, you know, Nick joins the band. I was like, well, what can I do with the best bass player in rock and roll? You know, what can I do? You know, then I met Eric Valentine before he was a big producer, and we became good friends. And so then it was like, well, what can I do with a $10,000 budget and the best producer in the world? You know, and so more and more it was like, oh shit, like I'm a cool person and people like my band if they're cool. And so even though we're not, you know, their managers are telling them, stay the fuck away from these idiots. You know, this isn't making you any money. What is the point? And they're going, I'm just trying to have fun, you know. So, you know, I had all these tools in front of me, and it was like, well, do I want to keep making Blood Guts over and over again? It's like, that's a great record, but, you know, I want to make something different. So then things would evolve in these different ways. But another thing I'm really proud of with the Dwarves is even as the production level went up and up and the musicianship went up and up, we always kept songs in there that were just hardcore or just nasty or just noisy. It was never like, because I would always see this thing with bands, you know, even bands that were pretty good, you know, like the first time I saw the Goo Goo Dolls, it was like, oh, this is pretty good. It's kind of like the Replacements. These guys are okay. And then every time you'd see them after, the band would get bigger and bigger and the music would get more and boring and the show would get worse. And you'd just be like, shit, man, like what happened? And like, that was the evolution of a lot of bands from my era. It was just like, how soft and deracinated and commercial can we get before we really make some money? And, you know, for the Dwarves, it was like, I wanted to evolve, but I didn't want to get lame, you know? So it was like, that was a challenge, you know, but I think we rose to it and we wound up on really low budgets making these high production records where you stack it up next to, you know, really big selling punk bands. And it was just like, why does the Dwarves record sound so much better than these guys from Orange County or LA that are, you know, selling 1 million punk records while we're selling a couple thousand, you know, when their record sounds like dog shit and ours sounds good, you know? And it would generally come down to marketing, or it would come down to like, you know, just luck. It would come down to like, hey, I was in high school in LA in 1982, so I'm a legend. You know, it's like, that doesn't make you a legend, dude. It makes you some guy from a California high school. It just, you know, and so the longer you stay in this business, the more random you see that it is, and the more random you see the rewards are. And things largely come down to luck. So the stuff we could control, I think we did really well, you know? And so somehow the Dwarves, which was like the trashiest, scariest band, evolved into like, oh, we got all the best players and we make the best sounding record, you know? And it was like, what the fuck happened? And we still couldn't get a deal or get an agent or get whatever, you know what I mean? Like it was funny. It was like the same struggles, but we managed to like figure out the art, figure out how to make great art over and over again in different ways, without really any support from the industry at all. And so that to bring it around, this record that's coming out now for Record Store Day, Sunshine, Lollipops, and Daydreams, this was the recording that we did before we did Blood, Guts, and Pussy. So it's a lot of that material, but recorded in a completely different way. It was just us live in the studio with no overdubs. So when I found this tape, you know, and we finally rescued our records from the asshole record labels that had them, I found this tape and I was like, this is amazing, you know? And so we went back and, you know, to friends of ours, the photographers on the record, like Michael Levine, who'd taken that iconic cover photo of Blood Guts. And we said, hey, let's use some different photos from that session for this. And we went back to Charles Peterson, who'd taken these iconic photos of the Dwarves live in Seattle. And it was when grunge was kicking off and people were first talking about it. And we were kind of the token punk band of the grunge bands. And, I got a bunch of his photos, and we just kind of remade the Blood Guts package, but with completely different audio. And then we went in there and it was like, wow, okay, we got different pictures, different audio. So I got the band to write liner notes, Badge Moore and Saltpeter, and we all, kind of pitched in our thoughts and recollections of this thing. So it's like, this record is really kind of important even for the fans who go, I only like Blood Guts. Everything else sucks after that. It's all overproduced bullshit. It's like, okay, well, this is for you too. This is for anyone who likes that kind of iconic period of the Dwarves. It's a very straightforward kind of project, so I was glad to do that. And I was glad Record Store Day picked up on it. It was just time to do that. It was like a bunch of 30-year-old recordings, and it was like, all right, let's do this,
Oh, no, for sure. Oh yeah, no, for sure. And I'm very excited for this release. So like, I'm kind of curious. So like, who got the ball rolling on getting this release out, and how was it, putting it all together?
I got the ball rolling. I mean, so it always comes back to that. Even the guys who are in the band are my buddies, have been with it for years and have done stuff, and cool people who've done favors for us. Nobody gets anything rolling but me. So, it basically happened when we got our master tapes back from the early 90s and late 80s. And I was like, okay, there's some stuff here that never came out. The actual albums that came out were Blood Guts, Thank Heaven for Little Girls, and Sugar Fix. And I remastered those, added tracks from like the 7 inches and stuff that came out around, and we re-released those, and people love them. They took off. The art looked better. There were more songs, and yet, it was the same record. So it wasn't like, again, we went and ruined it, and so that kind of got the ball rolling too. And so I knew that there would be a market for this, and Record Store Day is good because that stuff just sells immediately. And so, it comes to the attention of collectors as well as like fans of the band. And, it just seemed like the right time to do it. And I'm just really glad that, again, I got great people like Andy Carpenter, who I work with in the studio, who mixed this, but it was Jack Endino who recorded it originally. And, he's another legendary guy. He recorded Blood Guts and also recorded Bleach and those kind of records. So he was a great talent and a great guy. And, so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like, hey, this is nostalgic. This is great. These people were cool, but leaving all the bullshit out, like another stupid record label or whatever. It's like, nah, we'll just do this ourselves. And there you go. So very cool record. I think people are going to dig it a lot. And we're playing a bunch of shows around it. We're playing with I Hate God all over the West Coast, which is a great modern metal and kind of stonery band that I'm a fan of. And so that'll be interesting. We're doing Punk in the Park, great kind of pop punk festival that we play a lot. So just, I'm just gratified, man. I mean, bands as old and as crazy as us are not supposed to be around anymore and aren't supposed to be able to do anything interesting. And even when they come out with like, hey, here's some unreleased stuff, it'll be like an alternate version of the same recording that's slightly different, but basically the same. And it's just like, well, this was the worst version, It's like we really always keep the quality up, so I'm glad.
Oh no, for sure. And I do got a few things. Well, obviously, I want to highlight the tour real quick, and I do got a few other questions. But like the tour, obviously starting on April 11th. So like, I'm curious for you. Do you approach like touring and performing live differently than writing and recording music?
Oh yeah, 100%. Part of that just came from money. During the grunge era, I suddenly saw friends of mine getting rich and having tour buses and production, lighting guys and gear. And we never had any of that. So it was like, hey, if this is going to be a good show, it's going to be because we rocked out. And then at the same time in the studio, I started meeting people like Eric Valentine and Josh Fries and Nick Oliveri and these various people and guys in the Dwarves that you might not have heard of from other places who are also just great musicians, guys like Saltpeter and Fresh Prince of Darkness and Snoop Hawk and these different guys. And so, you know, once I had that arsenal of people, I was like, you know, I wonder if I can make a really good sounding record that's pleasing to my ears and to other people's ears, but that shifts gears a lot. And so it goes from like a nice pop punk song that any, you know, fan of the pop punk bands would like. And then all of a sudden it shifts gears to some hardcore and your ears go, wait a minute, you know, and then it shifts gears to some thrash and you're like, wait, I don't know if I like this. And then it switches gears to like garage rock and you go like, kind of like this, but what does that have to do with the thing before, you know? And so, yeah, I think like our live show didn't evolve at all. And our recordings just evolved and evolved and evolved and went up and up, you know? So it was very curious mix of things.
Oh, no, for sure. I've not had the opportunity to see you guys live, and I really like to, hopefully at some point, hopefully in the near future. But like, I'm curious for you, like, how do you like prepare a set list for a show, or is there a set list for a Dwarf show?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, again, this is something I'm happy about is that some bands go, well, we're doing our new stuff, you know, and other bands go, well, no, we're going to do the stuff the crowd likes and whatever. Our set is pretty seamless. I can play stuff from our last record, Dwarves concept album, or Keep It Real, and it mixes fine with live stuff from Blood, Guts, and Pussy from 30, 35 years before. I mean, you know, with a lot of bands, you know, it'll be like, oh no, they're doing the new stuff. I hate this. And then it's like, oh great, you did all the old stuff I like, you know. And with the Dwarves, the set is just checkered with new and old stuff. And it doesn't really slow down or ruin it no matter where you draw from. You know, even, you know, I mean, obviously, if somebody really loves a particular record or song and then they hear it, it's like, oh, that's the one I like. But it's like, it's just kind of different than a lot of bands I've seen where it's like very obviously, this is our old shit that's good. This is our new shit that sucks. You know, it's very like, it's all integrated together in our set and it just kind of flows along, you know.
Oh no, for sure. And yeah, that's what I like, but obviously listening to like the studio stuff is you have like that, you know, Dwarf sound, even as you were talking about earlier, even though it's like a garage rock song or a hardcore song or a punk rock song, it all kind of encompasses the Dwarves.
Yeah, and rock and roll as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I you know, the first scene I came up in was like garage retro stuff, and it always turned me off that they were like, you know, your record has to be between 1964 and 1967 sounding, and you know, you have to wear this outfit and you have to use this guitar. And it was just like, that's not rock and roll. Rock and roll is always happening everywhere, and you're either tapped into it or you're not. When I heard thrash, there were parts of it I liked and parts of it I didn't like. You know, when I heard grind, there were parts of it I liked and parts of it I didn't. When I hear garage bands, if you're a boring garage band, I don't like it just because it's garage. If you do pop punk, great. If I like the song, then I like it. If it's Green Day, it's like, hey, this is a good version of pop punk. If it's somebody else doing a half-ass Green Day imitation, it's like, well, I don't like this. This is a lame version of pop punk. You know, like I was always more like, I like every genre and way expanding beyond rock and roll. I mean, I haven't really listened to rock and roll records since the 80s. You know, by the time the 90s came, all I listened to were hip hop records. And, you know, when hip hop records started sucking in the 2000s, I just went back to listening to my, you know, 1920s and 30s blues and country records, and that's mostly what I'd listen to if I care, or a pop record by Irving Berlin, you know, song sung by Fred Astaire or whatever. I don't like, to me, music is just loose in the world. I just love music. And so I like the best version of everything. I love hardcore if it's the best hardcore, and I don't like the 90% mediocre hardcore. Grind is great for a minute or two. The best grind band, we see Napalm Death or whatever, okay, great. I don't want to see Napalm Death Imitator Part 55 do a shitty grind set. You know what I mean? So the through line of it is, it's always we're always trying to be a good version of every different genre. and then a few years ago, I really got my solo stuff in gear. And I have this new character called Ralph Champaign. And that's sort of like the same way the Dwarves hit all the hard genres, right, of metal and thrash and punk and garage. Ralph Champaign hits all the softer American genres of country and lounge and jazz and whatever that makes it, again, it's like, I'm not just trying to be a guy with a jazz group. And so here's a bunch of jazz songs and here's the best one first. And then here they get worse and worse as you go. It's like, no, if I got one good jazz song, I do that. And then if I got one good country song, I do that. And if I got one good humor song, I do that. And try and make a record that's interesting throughout, so that was sort of the Ralph Champaign idea, was that same eclecticism, but with a different character that's not doing hard head pounding stuff, and it's sort of a better character to kind of get old with, being old in a rock band. You always got to watch that, because old guys act a certain way and do things a certain way that I'm not very interested in when it comes to rock and roll. So it's kind of like, like I never wanted to be out there like, oh, all the young bands are so great and they're just kind of passing us by. I'm waiting for young bands that are great that are passing us by. I'm willing to go, good, you passed me by, you win, I'm old, let's get out of here. But in rock and roll, it just hasn't really happened much. Every once in a while I see great young bands. I just saw a good one called the Dollheads the other day that I really enjoyed, and they're in teenagers, and I thought they were great. So you see great stuff sometimes, but there hasn't been a scene that came along that's like, hey, the Dwarves, you're old hat now because there's this scene and it's so much better. It's like, I think rock and roll is largely dead, and hip hop too. So it's a question of what's the next thing going to be. I don't know what it's going to be.
No, for sure. Obviously, I've heard, a lot of people in the music industry talk about, is rock and roll dead, and like what is to come. Obviously, no one has really come up with an answer of like what is going to be, how is the music industry really going to progress, and what the predominant sound, like outside of like pop and stuff, is going to be. And honestly, I don't have an answer for that either, because it's like, I don't know. Like, I'm excited to see who steps up and like what kind of evolves, but obviously we're waiting to see what happens.
When people play punk now, they're playing a genre with rules and strictures.
Yeah, there's
when
parameters
punk
for
started, it was, well, here's Blondie, and then here's the Talking Heads, and then here's the Ramones, and then here's Suicide. And it was like, the only thing they had in common was they all played at the same club and they all shot up together. The music was completely different. And so punk started as a way of doing things, kind of, and it became a genre. And, I still approach it like it's a way of doing things. So I think if a great wave is going to come along, it's going to be because there's a bunch of kids with a way of doing things. That's what the music's going to be and what it's going to sound like. And it'll probably have elements of every kind of music in it. I mean, everybody grew up with hip hop now as part of the wallpaper, but I didn't. That came up when I was a teenager, and it was like, oh, what's this? So, whatever comes up is going to be a synthesis of everything that's already been. But what's going to make it new is that it's a bunch of kids doing it their way, as opposed to now, which is like the industry is very comfortable, and, people are operating within that industry stricture. You know what I'm saying? And so the more people are in that, the longer it's going to retard the forward propulsion of the music. And it's just going to be like, wow, isn't this great? They like me at punk label X. So I'm just going to plug my band into this thing that's already going, and hopefully we'll do okay in there. And it's like, unless you start your own label and your own scene and do your own thing, it's probably just going to be a shittier version of what came before, So, yeah, I mean, I think hip hop was hip hop and punk was punk, and now we need something different. But it's certainly not going to be led by guys like me. I'm pushing 60 years old. So it's like, say it's not going to come from me. The thing that's going to come from me is I'll continue to do what I do, which is eclecticism writ large, and I'm going to keep making cool records myself, but I'm not going to start a cool scene. I'm just going to, me and my friends are going to do the best we can, and they trust me to kind of shepherd the project forward, and they kind of supply all the, musicianship and art and photography and layout and all the things that you need,
Oh no, for sure. Definitely. Well, obviously, with you, obviously, I look forward to seeing obviously how everything progresses for you, and obviously, I'm very curious just for the music industry as a whole, kind of what you're talking about. With I never really considered it too. It's like it's more of a lifestyle compared to I want to be like this person or be like this band. It's more of it's the art that comes from you and how you live it.
Yeah, and even original punk rock didn't quite get that. They had a lot of eclecticism, which was the important thing, but they were all kind of within industry strictures too. Really, it was hardcore and the birth of hardcore bands where it was like, nobody wants to listen to us. No labels are interested in us. So we have to make our own label. I remember seeing Minor Threat and I was like, what is this venue? And you went down there and it was like, the Latino American Centro Center. And I was like, nobody's ever done a show here. It's like, yeah, because they made calls around Chicago. What can we rent? And then they just rented a place and put on the show there. Why? Because no venues wanted them. Black Flag kind of pioneered that in the hardcore era. And, really that was the great contribution of hardcore. And it doesn't get any respect or notice, but we made up our own world. It was not contained within the world that was already there. And, hip hop did the same when it was like, this is Too Short selling his own cassette out of his own car in Oakland and moving thousands of them that way. And it was like, holy shit, you made your own music industry. How did you do it? It was like you did it because they shut you out. They weren't letting him play at the Fox Theater then. And they weren't you know what I mean? It was like, he was Too Short. And people were like, this is just talking. I don't even know what this is. And it was like, no, you don't get it. This is important. And we're going to do this ourselves. And so, we really owe a great debt to the hardcore scene and the early hip hop cassette tape, mixtape scene. Because that was where the action was. That was where the new thing happened. And as long as people try and attach themselves like a barnacle to the existing music industry, things won't change that much.
I agree. Definitely. But now, as we're starting to close out this interview, Blag, thank you so much for your time. I had a fantastic time chatting with you, obviously about the Dwarves, your solo music, and the music industry as a whole as well. So, I'm curious as we're closing this out. So, what are the plans for the Dwarves and yourself for the rest of the year, 2025?
Oh man, well, we got a whole another Dwarves record recorded. And so now it's just a question of a little overdubbing and mixing. That probably won't even come out till summer 2026 because we got this record store day thing coming out. So it's just going to be kind of a lot of touring, but look for another Ralph Champaign record. That's done. It's being mastered right now. Worked in a lot more female vocal on this one. I teamed up with a great singer, Petra Hayden, who's another kind of sort of legendary outsider figure. She recreates whole albums, like she recreated the whole Who Sell Out record, all as female vocal. And I was just so fascinated with what she was doing that, she was nice enough to come in and sing with me. And, I just keep making records and doing things, that's all I can do.
Hey, well, I'm excited for everything you have in the works, and I'm definitely gonna check out her work as well. I'm not familiar, so I'm definitely gonna check her out. But
yeah, man, Petra Hayden. Well, thanks for talking to me. Send me a link,
Definitely we'll do that. But also, I'll drop some links to the Dwarves, obviously, and yourself in the description of this podcast. Make sure to check out the record store release as well. Pick it up if you like. But Blag, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you, Matthew.
Of course, for Blag the Ripper, I'm your host always, Matthew Thomas. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Super Cool Radio. And remember, stay frosty.